why we decided to do this big series is because there's lots of anticipation and excitement with the turn of the year, you know, because people think, you know, I wonder what could happen to me this year. People are hoping that maybe something big might happen to them or there'd be big changes in their lives. So that's why we decided to do this series big. But it's really funny, right? Because within the first few months of the year, that really dies out pretty quickly, right? When everybody kind of gets used to the mundane, the same thing, day in, day out. So, and we kind of don't really want that deep down inside, but we tell ourselves that that's just what life is like. And so, you know, you kind of convince yourself that that's what you have to do. But really, thinking about this year and this excitement of the year, we're thinking that real big things are in store for us and that we have a lot of potential to do big things. I'm not just talking about us as Drive Church, but even us as individuals. And I'll tell you why, I'll tell you what I mean. Before we get into anything, I want to actually go back to the way that we used to think when we were kids, okay? So just go back for me to the way that you used to think when you were a kid, all right? When we were kids, we actually used to think very extraordinarily, okay? And I'll tell you what I mean. That's when we played all the pretend games, okay? Just remember all the pretend games that you used to play? Some of us played, you know, like we acted to be the hero, or, you know, the person in charge, or the person that everybody else looks after. Maybe for some of the girls it's the princess, but not every girl wants to be the princess. You know, and that's why, I don't know if you guys know, but there's this movie coming out called Brave, where the girl doesn't want to be the princess, she wants to be like the hero, and so the heroine. And so we've all pretended games like that. For me, when I was a kid, we didn't, because I was born overseas, we didn't really have a lot of cartoons on TV and stuff like that. And in Africa, they were obsessed with like 90s action movies, right? So that's all I watched. I watched Rambo and Commando. You know those movies where they like kill every one of his family and he has to go back and just like kill all of them. So I always pretended to be the Rambo, you know, run around with a little gun, shooting everyone, which isn't that good for a kid, especially a kid, you know, growing up so close to the Middle East. So, not a good thing. But that's what I pretended to be because I wanted to be the hero. I wanted to be the person in charge, the one that saves the damsel in distress. We actually used to think very extraordinarily when we were kids. We used to think about big things and doing big things with our lives. And, you know, it might not have been the pretend games, I was a hero or this and that, or I was a champion, but you might have pretended that you were like famous, you know, you were a singer or like a sports star. I remember running around in the backyard with my soccer ball, you know, commentating to myself as I was dribbling, you know, pretending to be like the next Maradona, the one that did big things after him and stuff like that. But we all pretended to be something extraordinary, but that kind of dies out with age. I guess like as we get older, that slowly dies out, but really just think about it. Think about who taught us to think that way? No one. We did it from when we were kids naturally. It almost came naturally to us. That's why kindergarten teachers tell all their kids that every one of them is special, right? Can every kid actually be special? I think so. I believe that that's the case. I actually believe that God has put this thing inside us, right, where we want to be extraordinary. We don't want to just fit in and go unnoticed. That we want to do big things. And I believe that God has also put this thing in us where we want to be unique and special because I believe that God wants us to do big things for Him. And that His plan is actually extraordinarily big, right? And that He wants us to be part of that plan. But the thing is that as we get older, it goes away because I guess maybe when we get older, we feel like we're old now. We don't really have the capacity to do big things. And so that thing that came naturally at the start slowly starts to fade away. And some of us, I think, have this like inferiority complex. Like, you know, just because of where I come from or where I was born or the family that I'm from and stuff, I don't think I can do something that big. I don't think I can be anything extraordinary. And so we actually settle into becoming just like everybody else. I think that some of us are really creative as well. But we kind of feel like if we come up with an idea, because it originates in us, that it's either too dumb or it won't work. I think I get that all the time, just in myself. Like I've come up with these great ideas, but I kind of second guess myself because I think, well, they started with me. I don't think anybody else would like that. But it's not true. I think that stuff is all stuff that we've kind of picked up as we've grown and we've gotten older. But I think as we were kids, we really used to think the way God wanted us to think. Some of us actually find it hard to like come out of hiding. Like, we find it hard to just be exposed. Like, I'll tell you guys what I mean. This writer, I was reading his book and he was talking about how back in the day he used to act. And one day when he got a standing ovation, the way that he responded was, he ran off the stage, right? And like, you think, what a weirdo, you know, why would you run off the stage? But he felt like he ran off the stage because he just couldn't take that self-recognition. He couldn't just stand there and accept that applause. It was too weird for him. And I don't actually think he's a weirdo. I think a lot of us are like that. We don't want to be exposed like that and get that self-recognition. And so we kind of run away from it. Some of us are just scared to come out of hiding. There was this other female writer I was also reading, and she was talking about how girls have gone from, when they were kids, wanting to be special and stand out and be unique, to now they kind of just want to go unnoticed. They kind of just want to blend in. And the reason she talks about this, it's really funny actually, I think it's really true. She says when a girl walks into a room and there's a whole bunch of new people there, all the guys check her out, like we all know that, but all the girls check her out too, right? Because they assess the situation, they assess to see that she's not a threat and blah, 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 right? So girls have actually resorted to, because they don't want to ruffle the feathers or stand out, you know, or whatever, they've resorted to just going unnoticed. They would rather blend in than actually be portrayed as something really special, which is really, really different to the way a girl used to think when she was little. You know, she wanted to be the standout. She wanted to be the highlight. You know, the main person in that story, the princess, or whatever it is. But it's really funny how things change as we get older. Some others of us are actually scared of our potential. We're just scared that we might actually do something really big. Like in Aussie culture, I think that none of us really want to come across as extraordinary. It's not an Aussie thing, you know, like we kind of just like average Joes, and we like to be average Joes and stuff like that. But I think we play the humility card. I love that part about our culture, but I think we play the humility card in a wrong way. And I think we kind of just settle for things that we shouldn't, you know, for the mundane, for things that God doesn't want us to settle for. And God actually wants us to be something extraordinary. And so we just don't like standing out. And I think the last thing I wanted to talk about was, I think that some of us also don't feel like we can do big things or have an extraordinary life because we feel like we might have done something bad or had a bad past, or, you know, done a few things where we just feel like so dirty and disgusting that we don't feel like we deserve to have an extraordinary life. You know, but I think all of those things that I kind of just mentioned, they're all things that plague me all the time. And I'm sure that they're things, if they plague me, they plague other people too. But all of those things are rubbish. And I want to show you guys from the Bible what I'm talking about. And I want to explore this guy's life, Moses. Okay? Moses was this guy, and I'm sure you guys have heard about him and everything like that. There's movies that have been made about him, the Prince of Egypt and stuff like that. But he was this guy who was a Hebrew, okay? He was a Jew. But he ended up, through a whole series of events, actually living under King Pharaoh's, the king of Egypt's household. So he actually grew up as a prince, even though his nation were being slaves to the Egyptians, all right? So he grew up in privilege while his own countrymen were slaves. And so as he gets older, that starts to click in his mind. And look what happens in the Bible that actually tells us this story. It says, many years later, when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people, the Hebrews, and he saw how hard they were forced to work. During his visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. After looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. So just notice this. He actually looks everywhere first, make sure no one was watching. Then he kills him, then he hides him in the sand. So that's premeditated murder. It's cold-blooded, right? With his own bare hands, he kills this guy. Next day, when Moses went out to visit his people again, he saw two Hebrew men fighting. "Why are you beating up your friend?" Moses said to the one who started the fight. The man replied, "Who appointed you to be our prince and judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed that Egyptian yesterday?" Then Moses was afraid, thinking, everyone knows what I did. And sure enough, Pharaoh heard what had happened and he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian. When Moses arrived in Midian, he sat down beside a well. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I read this guy's story, this guy seems to me like he's running from himself. He's running from what he did. Sure enough, he was scared and he was running away from the king because the king was coming after him. But he was running away from what he did. Just imagine if you were to kill someone with your bare hands. Just imagine how cold-blooded that is, how much badly you'd think of yourself. The thing is, Moses actually saw something that concerned him. He saw his people being mistreated, right? But he went about it all the wrong way. And so he was running away from himself. He was running away from his past, and I really want to like draw your attention to what the guy says. You know, the two guys fighting. The guy says, "Who made you our leader? Who called you to be our boss?" Right? And this is what happens next. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called him from the middle of the bush, "Moses, Moses." Now, what had happened was Moses saw a bush that was like on fire but wasn't burning up. So he thought, man, this looks pretty weird. So he goes over there to look at it, and it's actually God who's appeared to him to talk to him. Calls out his name. "Here I am," Moses replied. "Do not come any closer," the Lord warned. "Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord told him, "I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering." In other words, God's saying, Moses, all the things that you're concerned about, I see too. I'm concerned about all the things that you care about right now and that actually worry you. "So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, the Hittites, and all these other people now live. Look, the cry of my people Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go," and this is the bit, goes, "Go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh, to the king himself. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt." And look at what Moses said. This is a classic response, right? This is our response. But Moses protested to God, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" I think he says, "Who am I?" for a few reasons, right? He says, who am I? Because of what he's done. Because he can't see himself doing something so big for God, because his past just tells him that he's dirty and he's disgusting and he's low, right? He shouldn't really have something like that extraordinary to do for God. I think that's one of the reasons why he says, "Who am I?" But you know what? I reckon one of the other reasons he says, "Who am I?" is because God, when he presents himself to Moses, he says, "I'm the God of who? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So he lists these people that are like, Moses probably thinks, they're my ancestors. They're the founders of our nation. I can't compare myself to them. Who am I? And there was a guy before Moses, his name was Joseph. And Joseph, he actually literally had dreams, okay? He literally had dreams, and his dreams were so far out that his parents scolded him for it. Like, he actually dreamed that his parents and all his 11 older brothers would one day bow down to him. And so his parents said, "What are you thinking? Like, you can't think that way." And because his brothers were so jealous of him and just hated him because of those things, they sold him as a slave to Egypt. That's how the Hebrews ended up as slaves. But when they sold him as a slave, through a whole bunch of series of events as well, he actually ended up being the second most powerful person in all of Egypt. And God gave him another dream. He had a heads up that there was going to be a shortage of food. And so, being the smart person that God had made him, he decided that he'd stock up on all this food. And when the time came and the famine came and the shortage of food happened, every nation around them was hungry but them. And one of the nations was the Hebrews, his family, right? And his family came back to Egypt to actually have some food. And guess who they had to talk to? Joseph. He was the one in charge. And guess what they had to do? They had to bow down to him. It didn't happen because Joseph, wanted to have revenge on his family or anything like that. But it actually happened because the dreams that, God gave him when he was young were real things that God wanted him to do when he got older. He actually wanted him to do big things. And I believe, the Bible actually really plainly and clearly tells us that we all have the potential to do big things because of who God made us. And I've got heaps of other examples. Like, there was a guy called Peter who was uneducated, right? Never went to school, but all these people followed him because of what he had to say about Jesus. There was another guy called John, another guy called Jeremiah who was young. He was 12 when God asked him to do something big, and he said, "I'm too young." So for us to say we're too young or we're too old, God said to Jeremiah, "No, I've made you for this very purpose, and I'm going to use you now because I said so." And the thing is, God says the same thing about us. We actually all have the potential to do big things because of who God made us. There's heaps of people in the Bible. There's this one verse in the Bible that actually plainly tells us about it, right? It actually says that God, He made us, and we're His workmanship. And He created us to do good works. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever read this verse in the Bible, but the word workmanship, in the original, the way it was written, is actually poema. Okay, it's the word poema. It's a Greek word, and it's where we get our word for
poetry.
Poem. Yeah, poem. Exactly. So it's like every one of us is actually God's poem that He has written, and He didn't just write it so we can look good. He wrote it so we can actually do good things that He's prepared for us in advance. So every one of us, because we've been made by God, we all have the potential to do big things. He's our origin. He's where we came from. So we have the potential to do big things. And there's lots of people that would say as well that those people back then had something that I don't have today. Like they had a certain character about them that I don't have today, or something like that. But I actually think it's the flip side, right? Because the Bible says that when you believe in what Jesus did for you on the cross, and when you understand that, when you have a relationship with God, that He puts His own Spirit inside you, right? So God's Spirit actually lives inside us if you've made that decision, right? Jesus was only 2,000 years ago. So everyone before Him, like Moses and Joseph, didn't actually have God's Spirit inside them. And God's Spirit empowers us to do big things. So really, it's like we have something that they didn't have, right? So it's completely the flip side. I feel like we all have the potential to do big things because of who God made us, and it's really plainly and clearly set out in the Bible. That's how I really feel like we should start thinking. There's people that would say, what are big things? Like, what are you talking about? Like, what am I going to do that's big? And I believe, right, that big things could be anything. I believe for me, for example, like, it's pretty big to see someone who didn't know anything about God, was completely disconnected from God, actually come to know something about Him and have this relationship with Him. So I want to be part of that. I think that's a big thing. So I want to be part of that, right? But you know what? Like Kim and I, we've got this kind of dream one day to have a big house, all right? Now, anybody would think that's really vain of you guys to think that way, all right? And it's true. I mean, a big house is just a big house. But you know what? I believe that anything, when it collides with God and who God is, becomes a big thing. It takes on this amplified quality. So I reckon if we had a big house, we could do so many things that actually make it such a big thing in the eyes of God. Like, I'm just thinking, you know, like if we had a big house, we could have heaps of people to share with us the things that we have, people to stay over, you know, even like a kind of like a drop-in place, you know, for people that might not have a place to live or might be on the street or something like that. Or even just like for the nieces and nephews, just to give them a break from the parents, or probably give the parents a break from them. But just, you know, that's what we would use it for. And I think anything, when it collides with God and who He is, can be such a big thing. Like my mate, he actually created that video you guys saw at the beginning. He's this guy who makes these animations. It's amazing. Like some of the work that he has, he renders them. It looks so cool, and you'd think he should be working for like DreamWorks or Pixar or whatever. But he's just so creative, right? When I went up to him and said, man, can you like do something for Drive Church? You know, he gets into what he does. But he enthusiastically said yes, because he's such a nice guy, right? But when he started doing that video for us, it's like his work took on this amplified quality, this better, bigger quality about it, right? Because it was starting to be for something higher than him, and it was starting to benefit someone else. And I think we all have the potential to do big things like that with whatever we've been given. It doesn't matter what it is, what that thing is, because of God and who He made us to be. And it could be as small, if you think it's small, but it could be as small as rocking up to Drive Church every second week when we have it, just being faithful, like just being committed, or whatever it is. It could be as small as that, but when it collides with God and His purpose and what He's got in store, it's something that becomes really, really big. I want to share with you guys like a bit of a movie, okay? You guys ever watched The Lion King? Oh, man. Okay. The Lion King is such a good movie. Just watch it if you get a chance, okay? But there's so many parts in The Lion King that just show me so much about God, right? Because there's just one bit, you know, in The Lion King, Simba is it's really funny when I talk about The Lion King, because it just makes me laugh. But anyway, you know, there's Simba, who's the heir to the throne, right? His dad dies, who is the king.
Mufasa.
And Mufasa, yeah, that's right. And he just wanders around and stuff like that, doing whatever he wants, and then he realizes that's not really what his life was meant to be, so he starts to question everything. He gets to this one point where he gets close to this lake, And he wants desperately some guidance. He wants desperately to hear like a voice from his dad, talk to him and stuff. So he gets to this body of water. He looks at the reflection of the water. He sees himself and he just says, it's just me. There's none of my father in me. This is what he says. And then all of a sudden, he hears this voice from the sky, and it's Mufasa, his dad. And Mufasa says, Simba, and Simba goes, Father? Like really kind of in doubt, And Mufasa, his dad, says to him, you have forgotten me. And Simba says to him, never, I'd never forget you. And the dad says, you have forgotten me because you have forgotten who you are. And he says, remember that you are the one true king and you are my son. Right? And I think that just draws so many parallels with us and God. I feel like God sometimes tells us, you've forgotten me. What are you talking about, God? Because you've forgotten how I've made you. You've forgotten who you are. You know what? Even if we're just talking about human beings, all human beings have been made in the image of God. And we were created to do something to reflect Him. And so I feel like sometimes when we talk ourselves down and we kind of like, put ourselves up short, I think that it's not just about us. I think sometimes we actually forget God. I think we're actually saying, God, I don't think you're very big. That's why we're doing this big series, because I believe and we believe that we can do big things because of God and who He made us. That's really true. There's this church out in Manly, right? They did this, the best thing. It was so cool. Manly is littered with artists, right? For this one time, when they had this Easter service, they decided instead of doing like a service where someone would get up and talk about, how Jesus died on the cross and stuff like that, what they decided to do is they actually broke up the story of Jesus dying on the cross in parts, in sections, and they just went out to these different artists, and mind you, none of them were Christians. They were just artists, right? They went out to these artists, gave each like a section of the story, and they said, we would love for you to create something to embody that part of your story, right? So for Easter, instead of having this church service, they had an art exhibition, all right? And so they had all these like stations of sculptures and stuff like, and paintings and stuff like that. And so people would walk into the church and go from one station to the next, kind of checking out everything. And this guy, my mate, who went to see that, he said he got to this one section and there was this massive cross and it was draped with ice. Okay, and the ice had red food coloring in it, so it looked like blood. And when you get to his station, this artist, he would give you a piece of the ice. He'd say, hold it in your hands, okay, until it melts. And so he did that, and he's like, he opens up his hands, and it looks like blood on your hands. And so, mind you, this artist is not a Christian. He says to him, the reason why he got you to do that is because it's like you've got his blood on your hands. It's because he died for the things that you've done. Which is pretty full on for someone who's not a Christian to actually understand that. All they had to do was give him just a part of the Bible, right? And the other thing as well is that ice kind of burns your hand. And so he says you're kind of like involved in some of the pain that Jesus had to go through for you. And it was just amazing. And you know what? I just look at that church and I think that church got it. Like they actually got that every one of us were made in God's image. They just went out to just normal artists, whoever they were. They gave them the story, and these people got it and created something so creative, so out there, it was so big, It's just what it is that we actually all have the potential to do big things because God made us. We come from Him. We're made by Him. And I just kind of want to finish up now, but I want to share something with you guys. I think another thing about big things, right, is that when we shorthand ourselves, it's not that we also enslave ourselves. And when we do big things and when we start to think in a big way, it's not that we become freer, just that. That's part of it. But you know what? When we shorthand ourselves, we also stop benefiting the world around us. And that's something that God just doesn't want us to get into the habit of doing. He actually wants us to be a benefit to everyone around us. And so when we start to think big and believe in our potential because of who God made us, we start to benefit the world around us. And that's what God wants. He loves people. He cares about people. He cares about this world. And He wants us to be a benefit to them. And I want to read you guys this quote just to finish off, okay? I love these words. So hopefully they come up because I don't have them down here. I'm going to read them across with you. All right, it says, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You're a child of God. You playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. Exactly some of the things that we were talking about. We were born to manifest the glory of God that is within us. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. I love those bits. I love when he says, when you think small, it's not just about you, but you're also kind of shorthanding people around you. When you think big, you benefit the world around you. And when you think big, when you believe in your potential because of where you come from, you also give other people the permission to do the same thing, to start to branch out, to start to get out of their comfort zone. Now, these could be good, really cool words on a piece of paper, but to know who actually wrote these words, his name would be Nelson Mandela, okay? Now, you guys would know Nelson Mandela. He went from being a prisoner, fighting for a cause that he felt was actually failing, to becoming the president of a whole nation, to changing the progress of a whole nation, to changing racism and apartheid and all those things. He believed in his potential. And you can't argue with him now that you look at his life, right? I think the last person you want to argue with is God. I think if he says that we have the potential to do big things, then we better believe it because we come from him and he's pretty big. And that's all I have to say, really. So I'm just going to pray.